The medical tent on forward operating base Arcturus smelled like a combination of antiseptic, recycled air, and what Liam had come to identify as essence of desperation with notes of "we're doing our best." He'd been awake for 16 hours straight, had treated everything from plasma burns to a bizarre case of alien fungal infection that made the patient temporarily bioluminescent, and was currently trying to convince his coffee maker that producing actual coffee instead of brown disappointment was within its capabilities. The machine gurgled ominously, and Liam decided that whatever it produced, he'd drink it anyway. This was frontier medicine. You adapted or you went home, and going home meant admitting that the recruitment posters showing heroic doctors saving lives among the stars had perhaps oversold the glamour and undersold the amount of improvisation involving duct tape. His medical AI, which he'd nicknamed Florence despite it having no gender and questionable sentience, chimed with its perpetually cheerful voice. "Dr. Reeves, you have exceeded recommended operational hours by 300%. I suggest rest. Florence, I suggest you suggest something useful, like how to treat a Centauri Marine's allergic reaction to our standard pain medication, with supplies that expired 2 months ago. I could provide treatment protocols for 17 additional species we have not yet encountered, if that would be helpful." It would not. The alarm cut through their exchange, with the kind of piercing urgency that meant something had gone wrong in new and exciting ways. Liam's hand went instinctively to his comm unit as Captain Tor's voice crackled through. "Medical to command. We've got a crash site 3 clicks northwest. Unknown vessel, no distress signal, possible survivors. Grab your kit." Liam was already moving, his exhaustion filing itself away in that mental drawer labeled "deal with later." He'd learned to function on adrenaline and spite, which was basically frontier medicine's unofficial motto. His emergency kit was always packed, had to be when your operating theater could turn into a combat zone with 30 seconds notice. He added extra broad-spectrum antibiotics, synthetic skin grafts, and a portable scanner that had been state-of-the-art approximately a decade ago. The rover ride to the crash site gave him time to mentally review xenobiology protocols, which mostly consisted of try not to kill the patient while figuring out their biology in real time. The security team accompanying him, Sergeant Quan and Private Martinez, maintained the kind of alert silence that suggested they expected whatever they found to shoot at them. The vessel was embedded in rocky terrain that looked like the planet's surface had personally fought the ship and won. But even crashed and smoking, the craft was beautiful in ways that made human engineering seem like we'd been building with mud and optimism. The hull curved in impossible geometries, and the metal seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving the whole thing an ethereal quality that Liam's exhausted brain struggled to process. "Readings show 1 life sign inside," Quan reported, her rifle trained on the breach in the hull. "Faint but stable." "Then let's not keep them waiting," Liam said, medical scanner in one hand and foolish optimism in his heart. The interior of the vessel was even more impressive, everything flowing in organic curves, controls that looked grown rather than manufactured, and a design philosophy that made human spacecraft feel like flying boxes. And there, partially buried under debris that had collapsed from the impact, he found her. She was humanoid enough that his brain registered person before alien, which was probably a survival trait left over from when humans needed to quickly identify friend or threat. Her skin had a luminescence to it, subtle but present, like moonlight had somehow become biological. Long ears curved upward from the sides of her head in elegant arcs, and her features carried a symmetry that suggested evolution or engineering had been very deliberate in its choices. She was also bleeding, unconscious, and his scanner was having what could only be described as an electronic panic attack trying to interpret her biology. "Secure the perimeter," Liam told the security team, already kneeling beside her. "I need to work." His hands moved automatically through triage, airway clear, breathing shallow but present, pulse rapid and thready according to his scanner's best guess. The blood was silver blue, which was different but not unprecedented. He treated enough non-human patients to know that biology was creative and adaptable, and the fundamentals usually applied across species. "Okay," he said softly, talking to her unconscious form the way he talked to all his patients, because studies showed that hearing was often the last sense to go and the first to return. "You've had a really bad day, but we're going to fix that. My name is Liam, I'm a doctor, and I promise I've seen worse. Not much worse, granted, but definitely worse." The lacerations across her shoulder and torso were deep, the kind of injuries that came from being thrown against something solid at speed. Her clothing, what remained of it, was unlike anything he'd seen, fabric that seemed to shift colors in different light, torn and burnt but clearly ceremonial in origin. Not military gear, maybe diplomatic, cultural. He filed the question away as irrelevant to immediate treatment. He cleaned the wounds with careful precision, his hands steady despite the strangeness of the situation. The synthetic skin grafts went on smoothly, and his scanner gave a tentative thumbs up about compatibility. Pain medication was trickier. He dosed conservatively, monitoring for adverse reactions, ready to counteragent if her biology decided human pharmaceuticals were poison. "Your cardiovascular system is fascinating," he continued, watching the scanner display. "Very efficient. Whoever designed you knew what they were doing. Evolution or engineering, either way, top marks." Her vital signs gradually stabilized into patterns that his scanner labeled as probably good, with the kind of uncertainty that made frontier medicine exciting. He checked the synthetic skin integration, noting with satisfaction that her biology was accepting it. The bone density readings suggested she was stronger than she looked, which was fortunate given the impact trauma. He sat back on his heels, exhausted but satisfied. Patient stabilized, immediate danger past, now just waiting for consciousness and hoping she woke up friendly rather than hostile. Her ears twitched slightly, the first independent movement he'd seen. Then her eyes opened, and Liam found himself staring into irises that contained galaxies, literal swirling colors that his brain couldn't quite process as a single hue. They were beautiful and deeply unsettling, like looking at something his evolutionary history hadn't prepared him for. She stared at him, her expression cycling through confusion and pain, and then her gaze dropped to his hand, still resting on her shoulder where he'd been checking the graft integration. Her eyes widened. She spoke in a language that sounded like music trying to pretend it was words, and his translator earpiece stuttered through several attempted interpretations before she switched to Terran Standard with an accent that made every syllable sound important. "Do you realize you're touching the queen of the galaxy, human?" Liam blinked, his exhausted brain processing this information at roughly the speed of continental drift. "I realize I'm touching a patient who had multiple lacerations and possible internal bleeding. The queen part is new information." Her expression did something complicated: shock, disbelief, and possibly amusement, all fighting for dominance. Do you understand what you have done?" "Saved your life," Liam offered because his bedside manner apparently didn't improve with royalty. "Look, Your Majesty, can I call you Your Majesty? I'm a doctor, you were injured, this is kind of what I do. The whole touching thing wasn't meant to be political." "My species has laws," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Older than your civilization, forbidding any being from making physical contact with the monarch. To touch the queen is to commit the highest sacrilege our people recognize." Liam looked at his hand still on her shoulder, looked back at her. "Should I stop touching you, or is the damage already done?" She made a sound that took him a moment to identify as laughter, which seemed incongruous given she just told him he'd committed ultra-sacrilege. "The damage, as you say, is profoundly done." From his comm unit, he heard Sergeant Quan's voice, very quiet and very stressed. "Doc, Please tell me you didn't just commit an interstellar incident. That is exactly what he has done, the Queen Ashira. She introduced herself formally as Queen Ashira of the Kalithian Empire, said, loud enough for the comm to pick up. And now we shall discover whether his ignorance will save him or doom us both. Queen Ashira refused to remain lying down despite Liam's increasingly insistent medical advice about patients with potential internal injuries and the inadvisability of movement. She was royal and injured and apparently accustomed to being obeyed, which put her at immediate philosophical odds with a field medic who'd spent years not being obeyed by patients who thought they knew better than medical science. Your Majesty, with all due respect, which I'm told is a lot, you need to stay still while I have been still enough, she said, attempting to sit up and immediately going pale in a way that transcended species. Liam caught her shoulder, more sacrilege, apparently, and eased her back down with the gentle firmness he'd perfected on stubborn Marines. How about a compromise? You stay horizontal for 10 more minutes while I make sure you're not bleeding internally, and then we'll discuss transportation back to base where I have actual medical equipment instead of a scanner held together with hope and expired warranty. She studied him with those impossible eyes, and something in her expression shifted. You speak to me as you would speak to anyone. You're a person who's injured. That's pretty much my only relevant data point right now. He was scanning her torso, watching for signs of internal bleeding his equipment might have missed. The Queen thing is important, I'm sure, but it's not going to change my treatment protocol. My own physicians approach me with such ceremony that medical examinations take hours of ritual preparation, Ashira said, and there was something in her voice that might have been loneliness. They touch me through sacred cloths, speak to me in formal verse, and treat every procedure as if approaching a divine artifact. That sounds incredibly inefficient, and also terrible for emergency medicine. Liam finished his scan, satisfied that the internal injuries were manageable. Okay, good news. You're probably not going to die in the next few hours. Bad news. You're definitely not going anywhere under your own power, which means I'm going to have to help you back to base. More sacrilege. At this point, I feel like we should just commit to the bit. He keyed his comm. Quan, we're going to need assistance getting Her Majesty back to base. She's stable but ambulatory is not advisable. There was a long pause. Doc, are we seriously about to carry an alien queen through hostile territory? Unless you've got a better plan, yes. I really don't, and I hate that. Getting Ashira to her feet required supporting most of her weight, which meant Liam's arm around her waist in what was apparently continued violation of every law her species held sacred. She leaned against him heavily, and he could feel her trying to maintain dignity while simultaneously trying not to collapse. I am not typically this weak, she said, as they began the slow journey back toward the rover. You're not weak, you're injured. There's a difference. Liam adjusted his grip, taking more of her weight. Also, you survived a spacecraft crash, which puts you ahead of most patients I've treated today. I was fleeing an assassination attempt, Ashira said, her voice tight with pain and something else, anger maybe, or betrayal. Elements within my own court who believe my policies of peaceful coexistence with other species undermine Kalithian supremacy. They sabotaged my vessel during what was supposed to be a secure diplomatic mission. Diplomatic mission to where? To your Terran coalition. Secret negotiations to end the border conflicts that have killed thousands. She paused, breathing hard. I was supposed to arrive with ceremony and proper protocols. Instead, I crashed on a frontier world and was treated for my injuries by a human who has now touched me more intimately than any being in my entire reign. Liam felt his face heat. That was medical necessity, not. I know, her voice was soft. That is what makes it extraordinary. They made it back to the rover, where Martinez had very carefully not made eye contact with the Queen while preparing emergency medical accommodations in the cargo area. The ride back to base was tense, with Liam monitoring Ashira's vitals and trying very hard not to think about the political implications of anything happening right now. Base Command had been notified, which meant Earth had been notified, which meant, through the miracle of terrible operational security, probably half the galaxy had been notified that the Queen of the Calithian Empire was currently in human custody after being touched extensively by a field medic. Liam's comm unit had 17 urgent messages waiting, which he ignored in favor of actually practicing medicine. By the time they reached the base medical facility, which was a generous term for tent with advanced equipment, there were no fewer than 3 admirals trying to establish secure communication channels, 2 xenoanthropologists demanding access, and 1 very stressed base commander who met them at the entrance. Commander Phillips took one look at Ashira, at Liam supporting her weight, and at the general situation and said, "Dr. Reeves, please tell me you have some idea what you've done." "Saved a life, sir. The complications are above my pay grade. Everything about this is above everyone's pay grade." Phillips stepped aside. "Get her stabilized. We've got incoming communications from the Calithian Empire, and they're using words our translators are rendering as things like abomination, desecration, and constitutional crisis. Any translations for 'we're grateful she's alive'?" "Working on it." Liam got Ashira situated in the medical facility's closest approximation of a private room, which meant a sectioned-off area with actual walls instead of curtains. He set up proper monitoring equipment, established an IV line with fluids his scanner suggested would work, and generally did all the things that made him feel like he was practicing actual medicine instead of frontier improvisation. Ashira watched him work with that same focused attention, her ears tilting slightly to track his movements. "You are very calm for someone who has triggered an interstellar incident. I've learned that panicking doesn't help patients." He checked the IV flow rate. "Also, I'm too tired to panic properly. Ask me again in 12 hours. In 12 hours, my people's response will have arrived. They will demand." She paused, and something complicated crossed her face. "I do not know what they will demand. This has never happened before. First time for everything." Liam pulled up a chair, his own exhaustion catching up with him. "For what it's worth, Your Majesty, I'm sorry I violated your laws. It wasn't intentional." "I know, that is precisely the problem." She shifted slightly, wincing. "If you had known and done it anyway, that would be deliberate sacrilege, punishable by execution. But you did not know. You simply acted with compassion and skill. My people's laws have no provision for innocent violation." "That seems like a design flaw." "It is a law designed to maintain distance between the monarch and all other beings. Distance creates reverence. Reverence maintains power." Her eyes met his. "But you touched me without reverence, without fear, without any understanding of what I represent. You treated me as a person." "You are a person. I am a symbol, an icon, a carefully maintained image of untouchable authority." Her voice was quiet. "I have not been touched by another being in 20 years. Not since my coronation, when the old traditions were reinforced and the Queen became separate from all physical existence." Liam didn't know what to say to that, so he did what he did best, checked her vital signs, adjusted her medication, and tried to make sure she was as comfortable as possible given the circumstances. His comm unit chimed. Commander Phillips's voice. "Reeves, we've got an incoming transmission from the Calithian Empire. It's marked as highest priority, and they're demanding to speak with both you and the Queen." Ashira's expression hardened back into something regal. "Let them speak. I will handle this." The holographic display materialized in the center of the medical bay, showing a Calithian male in robes so elaborate they probably required structural engineering. His ears were decorated with so much metalwork that Liam wondered about neck strain. When he saw Ashira, sitting on a medical cot, IV in her arm, with Liam standing nearby, his face went through several expressions that transcended language barriers. He spoke in rapid Calithian, and the translator struggled before rendering. Your Majesty, we are grateful for your survival but horrified by the circumstances. The human must be. The human saved my life, Ashira interrupted, her voice carrying absolute authority despite her injuries. Dr. Liam Reeves acted with skill and compassion while in complete ignorance of our laws. I will not permit harm to come to him. The law is clear. Then I invoke the right of sovereign protection. The words fell like stones into water, and the holographic official's ears went completely flat. Ancient privilege, rarely used but never revoked. Dr. Reeves is under my personal protection until I release him. The official looked like he was being strangled by his elaborate robes. Your Majesty, that right has not been invoked in 3 centuries, and it essentially means. I know precisely what it means. Ashira's gaze didn't waver. He belongs to me now, by law and by right. Any who would harm him would have to go through me first. Liam, who had been trying to stay quiet and professional, heard himself say, I feel like I should have read more of the cultural briefings. Ashira glanced at him and that small smile returned. You treated me as a person, not a symbol. That is worth more than all the briefings in your database. The transmission ended in what Liam could only describe as bureaucratic chaos, and he was left standing in his medical bay with an alien queen who had apparently just claimed him as personal property to prevent his execution for accidental sacrilege. So, he said eventually, that happened. That happened, Ashira agreed. And now we wait to see whether my empire tears itself apart over whether ancient tradition or royal protection takes precedence. Fun, indeed. She was watching him again, and there was something in her expression that made Liam acutely aware that he was standing very close to someone who had just declared him under her personal protection, which apparently had implications he didn't fully understand. Tell me, Dr. Reeves, are you frightened? Of the political situation? Terrified of you? No. Why not? Because you're my patient, Liam said simply. And I don't fear my patients, I just try to help them. Ashira's ears tilted forward and what he was learning meant interest or curiosity, and her smile widened just slightly. You are either very brave or very foolish. On a frontier base held together with duct tape and spite, those are usually the same thing. Outside, the galaxy was recalculating its politics, around the fact that someone had touched the untouchable queen. Inside the medical tent, an exhausted human doctor continued monitoring his patient's vital signs while said patient, Queen of the Galaxy, watched him with fascination that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the revolutionary concept that someone might treat her like she was simply human, or as close to human as an alien queen with galaxy eyes and impossible ears could be. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in how quickly political situations could escalate when you accidentally touched royalty. Liam had expected maybe some diplomatic protests, perhaps a sternly worded letter from the Calithian Empire, possibly a request for cultural sensitivity training. What he got instead was warships. Specifically, 3 Calithian Imperial dreadnoughts dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, their weapons systems active, their communications demanding the immediate return of their queen with language that the translator kept rendering as things like, or face annihilation, and your compliance is not optional. Commander Phillips had aged approximately 15 years in 3 days, and had taken to drinking coffee that was probably 50% stress by volume. Dr. Reeves, I need you to understand that your patient is currently the focal point of what might become an interstellar war. I'm aware, sir. Liam was checking Ashira's latest scans, satisfied that her internal injuries were healing faster than human baseline. Calithian biology was apparently optimized for recovery. In my defense, she was dying when I found her. Your defense is noted and completely irrelevant to the current political situation. Phillips rubbed his temples. The Calithian Empire is split. Half want you executed for sacrilege. A quarter want to use this as justification to abandon peace talks entirely, and the remaining quarter are apparently forming some kind of progressive movement around the idea that their queen being treated like a person instead of an icon is revolutionary. That politics is complicated. That is the understatement of the century. Phillips glanced toward the medical bay where Ashira was currently holding court, literally, conducting imperial business via holographic communications while sitting on a medical cot with monitoring equipment. She's refusing to leave without you. I'm her doctor, she's still recovering. She's invoked some ancient law that apparently makes you her personal property until she releases you. The xenoanthropology team is having heated debates about whether this makes you a protected asset, a diplomatic hostage, or accidentally married. Liam's hand slipped on his datapad. I'm sorry, what was that last one? Accidentally married. Apparently the right of sovereign protection has historical precedent that involves. Phillips checked his notes with the expression of someone reading his own death warrant, binding the protected individual to the Queen's household in ways that are either purely legal or possibly romantic, depending on interpretation, and which scholar you ask. I need to sit down. You're already sitting. I need to sit down more. In the medical bay, Ashira was dismissing a I see. She was quiet for a moment, studying him with those impossible eyes. And if I were not a queen, if I were simply a patient under your care, what would you recommend? I'd recommend you take it easy, avoid strenuous activity for another week, and follow up with your regular physician to ensure continued recovery. But you're not simply a patient. You're a political situation with a pulse. Ashira laughed, that same unexpected sound that seemed wrong coming from someone so regal. A political situation with a pulse. I must remember that phrasing. She stood, moving with the fluid grace of someone whose body remembered how to command space. Walk with me, Dr. Reeves. I wish to see this base that has become the center of galactic attention. It wasn't a request, and Liam found himself accompanying her through the corridors of forward operating base Arcturus, which had never been designed for royal visitation. Marines snapped to attention as they passed, not out of military protocol, but because Ashira radiated authority in ways that transcended species. Her ears tracked every sound, her gaze taking in details that most visitors would miss. Your people built this facility with remarkable efficiency, she observed. Minimal resources, maximum functionality. My empire could learn from this pragmatism. We call it making do with what we have. Less philosophical, more desperate improvisation. And yet you thrive. She paused at a viewport showing the planet's barren surface. I have ruled for 23 years, Dr. Reeves. I have made decisions that shaped the fates of billions. I have been worshipped, feared, respected, and obeyed. But I have not been touched. Not truly. Not the way you touched me when you cleaned my wounds and spoke to me about my fascinating cardiovascular system. Liam felt heat rise in his face. That was just. It was extraordinary. She turned to face him fully. Do you know what it is to be untouchable, to have every interaction mediated through ceremony and distance? To be so elevated that you cease to exist as a person and become only a symbol? I can't imagine. No, you cannot. But for a brief time, while unconscious and injured, I experienced what it was to be treated as simply a person who needed help. And when I woke to find your hand on my shoulder, checking your work with such casual competence, I felt something I have not felt in decades. Her voice was quiet. Vulnerability, connection, the simple humanity of being cared for without agenda or ceremony. Your Majesty, Ashira, when we are alone, you will call me Ashira. It was a command delivered with that same absolute authority. You have earned that right by being the only being in the galaxy who treats me as if I am not a queen. That seems politically dangerous. Everything about this situation is politically dangerous. She smiled, and it was sharper now, more calculated. The traditionalists in my court are calling for your execution. The progressives are calling for reform of our contact laws. The military wants me returned immediately before this becomes a diplomatic incident that escalates to war. And I am standing in a human medical facility on a frontier world, having invoked ancient laws to protect a doctor who saved my life, contemplating decisions that will reshape my empire. But what decisions? Whether to return to my people and resume being untouchable, or whether to demonstrate that perhaps our laws need changing. Her eyes held his. Whether to release you from my protection, or whether to claim that protection means something more. But Liam's medical training had not prepared him for this conversation. I feel like there are implications I'm not grasping. The right of sovereign protection binds you to my household until I release you. Historically, it has been used to claim individuals of exceptional value, warriors, scholars, artists, as permanent members of the royal court. Some interpretations suggest it creates a bond similar to what humans would call marriage, though our concept is more complex. She stepped closer, and Liam was very aware of the height difference, of the way her ears tilted forward in what he'd learned was intense focus. I am proposing an experiment, Dr. Reeves. You will return with me to the Imperial Palace. You will serve as my personal physician, which gives you legitimate access and reason to maintain contact. And we will discover whether your accidental sacrilege was truly sacrilege, or whether it was the beginning of something that could change how my people understand their queen. That's insane. That is politics. Her smile was genuine now. Also, you are still technically my property under Calithian law until I release you. I am simply proposing we make that arrangement official and useful rather than awkward and undefined. I have a job here, patience, responsibilities. You have a chance to prevent a war, reshape an empire's understanding of leadership, and possibly revolutionize Calithian human relations. She paused. Also, I find your company refreshingly honest, and I would like to continue experiencing what it is to be treated as a person rather than an icon. Liam looked at her, this alien queen who ruled hundreds of star systems, who had invoked ancient laws to protect him, who was standing in his medical facility proposing what amounted to either employment or marriage depending on interpretation, and felt his carefully constructed professional boundaries crumbling. If I agree to this, I need guarantees. My safety, my ability to practice medicine, and absolutely no more surprise legal bondage situations without clear explanation in advance. Agreed. Though I make no promises about the legal bondage situations, Calithian law is very complex. Her expression suggested she was joking, but Liam couldn't be entirely certain. I'm going to regret this. Probably. Ashira's hand reached out slowly, giving him time to move away. When he didn't, her fingers touched his arm. Light contact, testing, revolutionary. But perhaps we will both discover something worth the regret. The announcement went out through official channels. Queen Ashira of the Calithian Empire would return to her people, accompanied by Dr. Liam Reeves of the Terran Coalition, who would serve as her personal physician under the right of sovereign protection. The traditionalists were outraged. The progressives were ecstatic. The military was simply relieved their queen was alive and coming home, and the Terran Coalition was frantically trying to decide whether they just gained an unprecedented diplomatic advantage or lost a perfectly good field medic to alien politics. Liam packed his belongings, which fit in 2 bags because frontier living taught you not to accumulate possessions, and tried to process the fact that he was leaving forward operating base Arcturus, where medicine meant improvisation and duct tape, for an imperial palace where medicine apparently involved ritual ceremony, and his patient was an untouchable queen he'd already touched extensively. Commander Phillips found him in the medical bay, looking around the space that had been his domain for 3 years. You're really doing this? Apparently I'm property now, sir. Thought I'd make the best of it. You're going to be living in an alien palace, treating a queen who may or may not consider you her husband depending on legal interpretation, and serving as an unwitting ambassador for human-Calithian relations. When you put it that way, it sounds complicated. Reeves, it is complicated. But you saved her life, and somehow that simple act of medicine has created an opportunity for peace that diplomats couldn't achieve in years of negotiations. Phillips extended his hand. Don't screw it up. I'll do my best, sir. The shuttle that arrived to transport them was a work of art, all flowing lines and bioluminescent systems that made human spacecraft look like we'd been building with scrap metal. Ashira boarded with regal grace, and Liam followed with the awkward uncertainty of someone who'd gone from field medic to royal physician in less than a week. As they lifted off, Liam looked back at the base that had been his home, at the planet's barren surface, at the simple life of frontier medicine that he was leaving behind. Ashira sat beside him, closer than ceremony would typically allow, her hand resting near his in what might have been accident or deliberate choice. Are you frightened, Dr. Reeves? Terrified, Your Majesty. Ashira. Terrified, Ashira. Good. Fear means you understand the significance of what we are attempting. Her fingers moved slightly, touching his hand with contact that was still revolutionary, still illegal under traditional law, still the beginning of something neither of them could fully predict. I was dying when you found me. You cleaned my wounds, stabilized my injuries, and spoke to me about fascinating cardiovascular systems. You treated me as a person, and in doing so, you changed everything. I was just doing my job. You were being human, compassionate, skilled, and utterly unconcerned with the politics of who I was. She smiled, and those galaxy eyes held warmth that had nothing to do with medical treatment and everything to do with connection. Now we will discover whether that humanity can survive in an empire built on distance and ceremony, or whether it will transform what it means to be queen. The shuttle jumped to hyperspace, leaving forward operating base Arcturus behind. Ahead lay an imperial palace, political upheaval, ancient traditions colliding with revolutionary change, and the strange relationship between a human doctor and an alien queen that had started with accidental sacrilege, and was becoming something neither of them could name, but both were willing to explore. Liam looked at his hand, still touching hers, and thought about all the patients he'd treated over the years. Thousands of lives, thousands of moments of connection through medicine, but none quite like this. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad I found you when I did. As am I, Dr. Reeves. Ashira's hand tightened slightly on his. As am I. Behind them, wars were being averted, political movements were forming, traditions were being questioned. And at the center of it all, a simple act of medical compassion had become the catalyst for change across an empire. Because sometimes revolution starts not with grand gestures or political maneuvering, but with a tired doctor who treats a dying patient with kindness and doesn't realize he's touching the queen of the galaxy until it's too late to take it back. And sometimes, that's exactly the revolution the galaxy needs.